Alright guys, so we're going to talk a little bit today about a custom dash in your Foxbody. So there's two different styles of dashes, from 79 to 86 and then from 87 to 93. This is a 86, and this one in my opinion is a little easier, but they're both really easy. So the whole concept is replacing the factory gauge bezel with another piece with aftermarket gauges that are either look different or more accurate or whatever you're looking for. So the really nice thing about the factory gauge bezel on the 86 is that it works as a really good template for creating something like this. So this is a flat piece of aluminum. I purchased I think for like 40 bucks from metalsdepot.com. They shipped it to my door, and I was able to use the old factory piece and create a template and cut all this out. Now I've got a couple things I still need to finish up on this one, so as I'm doing that today, I'll walk you guys through a little bit more of how I did this. But let me show you. So you can see that piece of metal right there is that one right there on the wall. That one is left over from my project. So this is kind of the finished product. And it's not perfect, don't get me wrong. There's plenty of companies out there that sell super nice gauge bezels for, you know, $200-300 bucks. But my pockets aren't that deep with this project, and this was 30 bucks plus a little bit of time to cut some holes, and I think it looks good. So let's dive into a little bit more about doing this. So there's a couple of things that you guys should probably know about the factory gauges on a Foxbody if you're going to do something like this. And this goes for all of them. So there's some people that were concerned that if you remove your factory gauges that the ECU's not getting a signal and all of that jazz. So here's what I have to tell you. There's only a couple of your gauges on the dash that actually go to the ECU, and they're from different sending units. So your coolant is a really good example. So the factory temp sensor that goes to the dash is a one-wire unit, and it goes just to the dash. Then there's another temp sensor that goes to your ECU in the kick panel. And the difference is one's a one-wire sensor and one's a two-wire. So the two-wire sensor, there is resistance coming back on that second wire going to the ECU, so it can actually read that analog signal and know what the temperature is. These ones operate off a similar principle, but it uses the block as a ground, so it's less accurate. So things like the speedometer, if your car has cruise control, which most of them do, there is a vehicle speed sensor that is used for the cruise control, but that doesn't go back to the ECU. And as far as the tach signal, the same wire that goes to the tach signal here will actually it is tied into the ECU as well. So you don't have to worry about removing the gauge and then like, oh my gosh, I don't have a signal going to the ECU. That's not how it works. And then you have a volt gauge and also a fuel gauge, and neither of those go to the ECU. So that's the nice thing about these, and it's really easy to convert these gauges to like an electronic, like an autometer style or something like this that I've got. I got all these from Glow Shift, and you can't really tell with the sunlight, but it's a black face gauge, so they black out when you don't have the car on, and then you turn it on and it lights up. Let me get the battery power on so you can actually see that. So this is why I like these gauges. You can see without that glare on it, but you can see that they all light up after you turn the car on. So it's kind of what I like about these gauges, is they hide themselves, so to speak, once you turn the key off. But you can also change the color. I've got the 10 color style in the Speedo, the tach, the Speedo, and the fuel level gauge. The rest are their digital series, and I don't think they have those anymore. I've had these for a while. But at any rate, so hooking these up is really easy. Like I've got fuel pressure, we've got fuel level, and then I have my coolant temp, and then my oil pressure. And I believe, yeah, so I took the volt gauge out and I replaced it with fuel pressure on mine, so I can kind of monitor that. But with any of those, the sending unit will hook directly to a new gauge, and the scaling will be off a little bit, so it won't be as accurate. But these electronic gauges will all come with a sending unit that you can install in place of the factory sensor. Like, let's say, for example, your water temp or your coolant. So this gauge right here is the one that's on the factory cooler, the factory lower intake manifold in the coolant passage up front, and you can replace it. It'll come with a brass reducer and then another sensor that goes inside of it. So you can literally replace it part for part, and typically if you don't have the right brass fitting, you can get another one from your local parts store, Ace Hardware, or whatever. And those are really easy. Oil pressure, that's another one that's really easy. You replace the factory pressure sending unit that comes off the T on the side of the block on the driver's side. Replace it with the one for the new gauge, and then the fuel level. These are really nice because on almost any fuel level sender or fuel level gauge that you get, it can work with multitude of different sending units. You just have to know the factory's resistance of the one in the Foxbody units. I'll put it up on the screen so you guys can see it, but it's 240 ohms to 33 ohms is a factory Ford style. And you can also test the resistance on the wire coming right here. So you just touch one lead of your voltmeter to ground and the other to the sensor, and then it'll give you a readout in ohms, so you can kind of get an idea of where it's at now, so you know whether it's full or not, and kind of gauge with that. Fuel pressure. So all of these are really simple if you're replacing like for like, right? So your oil pressure, your water temp, your fuel level, and then voltmeter. Those are like for like. You can connect to the wires that are currently going to your factory gauge bezel. The one thing that you have to know is when you look at the back of your factory cluster, right? It's a printed, I'll call it a circuit board, but it's not. It's like a laminate layover thing because it's really floppy. It's not really a circuit board. But you can see where the plug goes. You can see which wire contacts that strip on it, and you can follow that to the gauge so you know what wire color, or you can use a voltmeter and ohm it out. Either way, it's really easy to do, or test for continuity. But you can follow where that wire goes so you know which gauge it goes to, then you know which wire it's for, and then you can also test the resistance or continuity from the wire inside the car out to wherever the sending unit is out there to make sure you've got the correct wire that you're using. So you don't have to run a whole lot of wires, or any, you shouldn't have to, from here out to the engine compartment, because you can reuse what the factory sensors were using, or the factory gauges, my bad, not sensors. So it's fairly easy to use. And the other thing that's really nice on a Foxbody, so this is a tack, and the signal wire that goes to the tack from the factory is the same one that you can use on this. And then for the Speedo, now this is what's really cool. If your car has or came with cruise control, like you can see on my steering wheel here, right? So I had the factory cruise control. There is a vehicle speed sensor in the transmission that you can hook up to an electronic speedometer inside your car and make it work. So like this guy here is an electronic speedometer. There's no more cable. I'll show you. So there's no more cable on the back of this guy, which is super nice. See that? No cable going to the back of it. It's all electronically driven. So you can take your signal wire that goes from your vehicle speed sensor, and then you can hook that directly up to this. But there is a green wire that goes to the cruise control box that's right down underneath your steering wheel. There's a green wire that comes from the sensor on the transmission. So if you do have cruise control, you'll see where the cable connects to the transmission, and right next to it there's a little connector, like a 3-wire connector for the cruise control. There's a green wire that comes from that connector to the control box in the car. That's what you tap onto for this guy for your signal wire on your speedometer. It's a really easy deal. And then you get rid of the cable. You don't have all that mess, and it's just a lot cleaner, in my opinion. So that's kind of the rundown on what you have to do. And the wiring, so mine, I actually need to redo a few things. You can see I've kind of got a cluster back in here, but what I tried to do was I put all these little labels on all of my wires so I know what they go to. Like that's my oil pressure sensor. What's this guy say? This one's probably for my fuel level sensor. There's a light that's coming from the switch. So I labeled everything nicely, but you can see it's still kind of a jumble because it came from two different connectors, and I just kind of shoved them in the dash. So what I'd like to do today is clean some of that wiring up, and I'm going to get I've got some weather pack connectors that I'm going to use and splice and get everything where it needs to be, so that I get rid of some of this garbage here. It'll just clean it up a little bit more. I kind of did this in a hurry just to make it work. So, but anyway, that's kind of the rundown on how to do this. And the other ones, so the 87 to 93, the dash on those, the nice thing about it is, so you've got the little kind of like, we'll call it cluster outline, right? So it kind of encloses everything, and you've got your gauges in there. So you can take out that factory bezel, and you can create a metal plate just like this. You can cut it out of whatever size aluminum you want, 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch, and you can make it fit in there. So you can bend these tabs backwards behind it, screw it into the inside of it, and then put your gauges inside of that factory 87 to 93 cluster. I did that on one of my other project cars long ago. That's a really easy thing to do, so you can get rid of the factory gauge cluster and make it so that you can always put it back in. That's kind of the nice thing about this. If I ever wanted to put my factory one back in, all I have to do is pull this out, and I've still got the factory cluster, or the factory bezel at home along with the gauges, and I can just put all of that stuff right back in the dash. I didn't hurt anything doing this. It's a really easy deal. So. hopefully that gives you guys kind of a better overview of how to put a custom gauge bezel in your car, and it's a really good upgrade in my opinion, and it's worth it. I love the gauges I've got in my car, and they're so much better than the factory ones, just personal opinion. Some people like the factory look, but anyway guys, thanks for watching. I appreciate you supporting the channel. If you've got any questions, throw them in the comments below. I will do my best to answer them to the best of my ability. Take care, have a good one, and we'll see you on the next video.